Okay. Give it just one more second and we will run.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hope the power stays on.
I know, right? All right, so we are going to kick it off.
All right.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. You are listening to the Crude Audacity podcast, the podcast that talks shop shit and all things strategy with oil patch influencers. I'm Catherine Mills, and you are tuned in to our 710 Oilfield News segment. This is the segment where we address all current events currently affecting the patch. So, as everyone knows from the nightly news and daily posts to pump route chats and boardroom discussions, the world needs a pivot. We need a strategy. We need a life after lockdown. However, we are no longer playing the same game. And while we have addressed mental health and work-life integration, we now need a business plan. We need a strategy, and we need unfiltered, unbiased data. So, all of that addressed, today I am joined by James Constas of Prizm Group. He is the president and co-founder, and we will be addressing lookbacks and leverage, how to move forward and do so strategically. James, how are you doing today?
Hey, Catherine. I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you so much for joining. I'm thrilled for this discussion. I feel like we've had a lot of people, throwing this question around. We're seeing it from all angles. We're seeing it from all political viewpoints. And nobody really knows what the future is holding because we've never been here before. So before we jump all into it, how did you get started in marketing? How did you get started in the oil field? And I know you've expanded to all other industries. So can you give us a rundown?
Yeah, so I'm wearing my Rockies hat today because I am a baseball fan, and I do miss it. So I kind of feel, life after lockdown. That is definitely one thing I like to see come back would be a little bit of Major League Baseball.
Right.
If we can get it. So I'm just putting that plug out there in case the commissioner is watching. We will watch it, and we will watch it all day and all night if you put it out there. So. Just want to say that, but yeah, so interesting. I didn't come from a oil state like a lot of people in the business. I came from Arizona, so I'm wearing my Arizona State logo T-shirt today. And when I graduated with a degree in international management, I did my case study on Exxon, and I just thought that the oil business was the greatest business in the world, and I had to be a part of it. And so I considered myself really lucky that right after college, I went to work for a big oil company and spent many years in the oil patch and learned the business from the ground up at an E&P company or two, and that led to other thing. And all of a sudden, boom, we got into investor relations and marketing. So that's my life story.
Oh, that's awesome. So what does Prizm Group do? How long have y'all been around? What's the skinny on that?
Yeah, so about 3.5 years ago, we just decided to start Prizm Group because we wanted to focus on marketing communications and bringing digital marketing solutions to the energy tech sector, and really try to also bring more technology-based solutions to our investor relations clients. And since then, we've grown. We started with a couple people, me and Eric Carlgren, and since then we've grown, and we continue to hold our own in this market. So it's been really fascinating, how things have evolved. 3.5 years ago, digital marketing was still very much new in the energy space, and now it's something that I think a lot more people have accepted. They've adopted it. You start to see oil and gas companies, make digital marketing a core part of their strategy. So that's really where we sit. And yeah, we work with more than just oil and gas companies, but that's my background. I can't escape it. I don't want to. And so we'll always have energy as a core market that we focus on.
Well, you know that I say energy is the foundation of all other markets. No matter which way you slice it, you cannot get away from oil and gas and what we provide to the public and, to the global economy as a whole. So being a business owner and, we were hit by two black swans globally, or one major black swan in the oil field was hit with two. It seems
Yeah.
like overnight that has flown out the window, but we are still looking for a return. We're still looking to get back to business in a normal capacity. So, being a business owner, what are you seeing? What's standing out to you? Let's start broad and start whittling down.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a big topic. So, I may just have to ramble on for 10 minutes straight here, Catherine, but you opened the door. But at any rate, yeah. So as a business owner, and I talk to other business owners, including, a lot of our client CEOs and heads of marketing and sales. And I think we're all eager to get back to, work, and we're starting to see that, and fortunately, most oil and gas producers and associated service companies are essential businesses anyway. So they were already open. Just driving up through Weld County north of Colorado, water hauler trucks are moving. There's rigs that are drilling. There's only 6 rigs drilling in Colorado right now, which is down from 31 a year ago. So there's So, I mean, that's a dramatic reduction in oil field activity that we've seen. But I think we all want to get back to normal, but we still got a lot of time between here and there. I was looking at some predictions of oil prices, and they're saying, a couple analysts from, I think it was J.P. Morgan and others are saying, if we want to see oil back around $50, West Texas Intermediate, we're going to have to wait till the second half of next year. That's 12 months from now. That's 12 months. And there's a lot of time. And we've got close to, 40 million people unemployed right now. So there's a lot of uncertainty between here and there. And so, what do we look for? Well, I think the most important thing that we have to look for, if you look at some of the economic forecasters like Economic Cycle Research Institute and others, is that you got to look at the employment numbers. You got to look at, are people going back to work? Do they have incomes that they can spend? We're still a consumer driven economy. And right now we're looking at unemployment at around 26%. So we went from first to worst in 2 months as of the result of travel restrictions, stay in place orders, and other reactions to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it's a combination of what mileposts are we going to look for. We're going to look for improving employment statistics. We need to look for continued reopening of the economy in places where it's still pretty much shut down, and basically, hope for the best. It's tough, but there's still a lot of business going on.
It's on skeleton crews, but it is happening, and it's happening more in boardrooms in the field right now. I think there was in 30 days of just stopping drilling operations, not even shut-ins. Significant percentage decreases in daily production across just the Permian itself. So take all of that and multiply it across all of our major oil basins. It's been quite shocking. But one of the things that we do well in this industry is we understand that all models are wrong and some are useful. So from your perspective on all market analytics right now and how we are seeing in the nightly news, is this something we can look back on and say the way we present data is questionable and the way the public consumes data is more questionable? And that is, that affects several topics across the oil industry, but in a global economy and the markets as a whole, what are you seeing from that? What's happening from COVID?
Yeah, man, that's a controversial subject, but I think what isn't controversial, or maybe it is for some, I don't know, but the models that were used to justify a lot of the policy response, stay in place orders, travel restrictions, and so forth. A lot of those models have turned out to be wildly inaccurate, and I
normal. That is a very normal thing.
And that is true. And so, I'm a recovering financial analyst myself. And I built pretty much a career based on economic and financial modeling. And we even though we're marketing, we always try to apply financial modeling, economic modeling when we can, especially to highlight a company's value proposition to another client. And that's how we help them decide how they're going to approach the market, how they're going to approach clients. And so, but so I have some views on modeling that as a practitioner that might be different from that of a policymaker. So when we think about the early models on COVID-19, at least here in Colorado, we were being told that something like if we had 60% social distancing, that we would see something like 13,000 plus deaths. Now, so if you're a modeler, you have to put out your assumptions, right?
You have to put out your uncertainties.
So here's a caveat: we're not done with COVID-19.
No.
So every single pandemic we've had, including this pandemic, we've had 4 in the past 100 years. We had one in 1918, obviously, the famous Spanish flu, which didn't come from Spain.
Didn't it come from like Kansas or something?
No, it came from Asia. It came from China.
Oh, did it? I didn't realize that.
And now I'm not an epidemiologist, so somebody may need to correct me in the comments below, but I'll say that. But it was first noticed from troops returning from Spain from World War I, and so people suspect that that's how it got to the U.S. But we also had a 1968 pandemic. We had only 10 years ago, we had the H1N1 pandemic.
That was over as quickly as it started, though.
In each one of these, if memory serves, I know at least the Spanish flu pandemic and the most recent one, the H1N1 of 2009, both of those had a second wave. So we should expect a second wave no matter what in the fall. And here's an interesting fact that I did not know about the H1N1 pandemic, which was that virus is still out there.
Yeah.
It shows up.
Doesn't go away.
It shows up every fall with seasonal flu, and it's just that we, as a humanity, we've now developed herd immunity to it, and we have vaccines for it. So if we see it coming, then the health professionals know which vaccine, or they make their best guess that we might need it, and so forth. But that's what makes this one so. I think what made it so worrisome for policymakers, which was, we've never seen it before. No one has any kind of immunity to it. We don't know what to expect. And then they put these models together that were based on assumptions where, it's with modeling anything, with whether you're modeling an investment portfolio or value proposition or a strategic plan, whatever. It's garbage in, garbage out, right?
Always.
That's always the case, and I know that's kind of a cliche, but it is true. So do you really have good inputs into those models if you've only had 4 previous pandemics to look at? And what's interesting is that this one, this latest COVID-19 pandemic, for example, what we're finding is that, at least in Colorado, where we have data, is that 75% of the mortality is coming from people above the age of 80.
Yes.
Or 70. So but 54% is above the age of 80. So we know that's different than the H1N1 pandemic, where the CDC estimates that 65% of the people who were infected were young, were in their 30s and below. So how do you know? This is past prologue. Can you use past data to use as credible assumptions into your model? When you only have 4 pandemics to look at, it makes it tough. And I don't envy the people who try to make sense of all that data, and epidemiologists try to put models together. But we were told back in March that we would see more than 13,000 deaths here in Colorado, and so far I think we're at 1,185.
Yeah.
If you look at the Colorado Department of Health and Environment's website. So that's a big difference. Now, remember my caveat: we're not through this yet. So we will see more cases. We will see more mortality, unfortunately, here in Colorado. But it's really hard to imagine that we would ever see what the models originally estimated. So.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you're right. We are not through it yet. And I think everyone understands the need to be respectful. But from a business side, and you being a business owner and a market analyst, looking at all of this, was it the right response? Was the shutdown really as useful? I mean, and again, we are not nightly news. We are not telling a story. We should be looking at data and building the story, because the story is still building, to your point. So from your perspective, what we're seeing, I mean, half of Golden shut down, and then, last week it's like snap over and everything is somewhat socially distanced, but it is opening back up, not because anybody necessarily wants to. I think there are people who are still scared, but we have to. So was the response right, and what are your thoughts on it?
Again, so being a modeler, I'm going to put the caveat out there, that just emphasize what you put out there, is that we're not through with this yet, and we won't know until much later. I think everybody obviously is going to be studying this for years to come. So we really don't know exactly if it was the right response or not. But today, June 3rd, 2020, it does appear that the one size fits all policy to lock down the entire economy was probably an overreaction. We're seeing other states where they did not take this approach. Now, again, more time will give us more data to test our assumptions, and will give us the final result. But I think this, when you think about a pandemic, it's a multidimensional problem, right? I mean, you've got human lives at stake. You people, you have to deal with mortality. You have economic issues. You have second and third order political and social issues. If this goes on forever, we just printed $2 trillion of imaginary money. We put that into the economy for good reason, because it was the result of government policy that we went from first to worst. But now, was it warranted? And so as a policymaker, you really have to take in all of these inputs. As a business owner, the anxiety is that the cure is worse than the disease. And I know that that's a phrase. It's a controversial phrase, and I know a lot of people take exception with it. But I think, if the intent behind that phrase is not that, oh, we shouldn't do anything, or we shouldn't have any sort of public policy when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's, let's look at what the right policy should be. And so
I agree with that. Yeah. Reevaluate policy. Again, lookbacks for leverage.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what is the right policy? Well, I think today, if you let's look at the data. So we're talking about modeling and information and data. So if we know that the majority or the at-risk population are people 70 and above, we need policies to protect and sequester that group. That's the high-risk group.
Mm-hmm.
The other folks need to be able to, following appropriate CDC guidelines and following common sense practices, and if they feel comfortable getting back into the workforce, we need to start reopening. Now, I know we're doing that, but I think there's a lot of people who they don't trust business owners to do the right thing, and I think we can. I think
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, in times of downturn, to what we were discussing prior. For those that don't know, we didn't know if we could go live because I had a major power outage. But as you and I were discussing, in times of the Great Depression, nobody had time or honestly the money to sit back and say, how's my mental health? How is my work-life balance? Everyone was so poor that they had to stay busy, and they had to work together and trust each other to work together. So
Yeah.
You know,
So here's the problem with the one size fits all policy, though, is that we have a lot of businesses that will never reopen. You know,
yeah, it's
you
really
know,
sad.
my wife works part time at a small shop, and they just opened a couple weeks ago when Douglas County down here opened up, and there's restaurants and stuff in the same little shopping area. They're done. They're not coming back. And the people who started those businesses invested their life savings, their 401ks, and they're not going to be made whole by any government policy.
Nope.
And so would it have been better for people who, if they're following guidelines and they were willing to they're really ready to assess their own risk and have the freedom to make their own choices, would those businesses still be around? I think arguably, yeah, many of them would be, and some of them would not be. It's hard to make that claim, but as far as the cure being worse than the disease, staying closed means more people are losing their life savings. More people are losing their livelihoods. These are going to create dependencies. This creates anxiety. This creates mental health problems. This creates it. We don't know what kind of social problems this is going to create, or political unrest it might create down the road. So it's going to be, we don't know. Let's put it that way. But right now, I'd say, sitting here at June 3rd, it looks like an overreaction.
I would say sitting at June 3rd, I think you're right. And the it being an election year, my favorite, I do love arguing with just about anybody over politics. But I think it's all very interesting timing with all of the events that we have happening. And, it seems I see more memes on social media. Everyone's primary form of communication these days is 2020 is done. We played Jumanji. We opened Pandora's box, covered the cave they found last week. Some scientists found a cave with 300 unique organisms in it, and people were screaming for him to close it back up. We don't know what's in there. So, I'd say that's what's come out of the events thus far are the truths are it doesn't matter what news channel or outlet you use, you cannot trust anybody with an agenda and a story. And that is the Daily Post and the Nightly News. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. There are claims of a V-shaped return, which is almost like an ideal gas. It exists in the lab, but does it exist in reality? And people are now so fed up with 2020 that they're not even looking at Q3 and Q4. They're waiting for Q2 of 2021. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I think these are all very dangerous circumstances for us that people are not using the lookbacks for leverage. We're skipping the fix.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, Catherine, and I mean, what do they always say about opinions? Everyone's got one, right? So
there's a second part to that, but we can't say it.
Right. So with that in mind, and I appreciate your comment on, people, you can't necessarily trust news from people or outlets with an agenda. And I think, when we look at our marketing practice and we look at how we help clients with their communications, at the center of everything really is it's really simple, and it sounds kind of corny, but it's true. And that's just be honest. I mean, just have your facts, be true to yourself, and be honest about the problems you can solve, and people will love you for that. And so right now, I think it's difficult for people if they just watch, in this age of polarized political polarization, it's really hard to want to watch more than one outlet and get your news from more than one source. But I'll watch one outlet to understand what the right wants me to understand. I'll watch another to understand what the left wants me to believe, and then I'll look at a few outside the U.S. to see how Asia and Europe might to be looking at us, and then try to take all that based on my own experience and come up with something that I think is probably closer to the truth than if I just looked at one outlet.
Are you noticing any stats that you're kind of coming down to for the return of business and that V-shaped recovery, or the claim or hope of a V-shaped recovery?
Yeah, I think anyone who says that we're going to have a V-shaped recovery I mean, let's put it this way. How accurate is the weatherman?
I don't know. I need that job. You can't get fired in that job.
Who's ever made here's the one that's closer to home. Who's ever made a lot of money accurately predicting oil prices? You might get lucky once in a while, but at the end of the day, everyone knows that it's a fool's errand. It really is. And as someone who's tried to model that, it just forget it. Hands up. I quit. I give up. We'll just focus on what we know and do it well. But the V-Shape Recovery, I think, is maybe an aspirational statement that's designed to help people, at least right now, feel good.
But the market is driven by emotion. You can't say otherwise. President Trump would not be able to change the market with one tweet if it wasn't driven by emotion. So that feel-good factor, it resonates. It excites people.
I might put a finer point on it and say that the emotions are fear and greed, at least when it comes to Wall Street.
Really good point.
And I didn't make that up, but the point being is that those are the animal spirits of the free market. Once people realize, if they see a tweet from the president that gives them that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that is less regulation, more freedom, greater markets, higher wages, more demand.
Very libertarians, me.
Well, yeah, or just pro business. There are some pro business Democrats too. But some of the signs that we're seeing, just anecdotally, I think are really really interesting to see. So let's rewind. Let's say 6 to 8 weeks, and we were running some campaigns for clients, and I'm talking about email campaigns, so digital marketing, and so going back to modeling, everything we do relies on data and relies on information. And so, the three key metrics that we look at when we look at email marketing campaigns are open rate. Did people open it? Did they click through to the call to action? And did they unsubscribe? So we saw, because that's the worst. The worst is if they unsubscribe, because then they'll never talk. They're saying, I don't want to talk to you.
Exactly. And word of mouth is the biggest. It doesn't matter what anyone says. Word of mouth is the primary tool everywhere.
Yeah, and that the mouth, often turns into an email. If you forward that email to someone that says, hey, I think you should take a look at this. I mean, that's kind of an implicit endorsement of that offering. So what we're seeing is in the 3 to 4 weeks following the stay in place orders, we saw a big degradation in those three metrics. We saw open rates fall by half. We saw click to open rates fall half again. And we not only did we see the unsubscribe rate go up, we actually, some of our clients got nasty emails from people saying, how dare you promote your product when we're busy here worrying about our jobs. Completely.
Are you serious? That was the response.
Completely understandable, though, in the environment.
Do you think so? I know everyone's worrying about their jobs, but when you stop, you die. I know there's a better saying for it, but when you agree to quit, you die. There's no question about that.
Yeah, we didn't expect those kind of reactions, because if we did, we probably would have not run the campaign. But that we kind of went forward with what you were talking about with that ethic, and saying, look, we have an obligation to clients, and businesses have an obligation to their investors and their employees. And so, being an essential business, we're trying to show you ways that you can reduce your operating expenses. We're showing you ways that you can be more productive. We're trying to introduce you to ways that can help you adapt quicker to the new realities of the oil and gas market. But what was interesting, though, is that once that client called back the person who had sent them the nasty note, they actually had a very good conversation. The person resubscribed, and it was overall a positive experience. Let's just put it this way. Emotions and anxiety were high. I mean, people were at home, and we're humans, right? I mean, my kids have left the nest for the most part, but you know, people were now dealing with, they had to be teachers, you know, all of a sudden, and you know, try to teach, you know, fractions. I, I know
Jesus.
you're
That's why we have iPhones.
right. I know you're an engineer and you're always right, but you know,
I
when it,
couldn't derive shit at this point. I'm sorry, like not to put it vulgarly, but like I'm so far out of that daily, math game for all the basics. You build your calculators, you forget about it. You have to go reteach yourself. I
yeah.
totally understand the stress.
So very stressful. You know, some people were losing. You know, they probably had friends and family who were losing their jobs. You know, quick anecdote: my sister-in-law lost her mother, and she couldn't go to her funeral. You know, and it was tough. And I guess the point being is that, you know, it was a different world. But now when we look at email marketing metrics, it's off the charts. I mean, I'm running a campaign today for a client. We're seeing open rates like approaching 50%. That's huge.
So enthusiasm is coming back.
I don't know if it's a combination of enthusiasm, or I'm tired of focusing on fractions, you know, teaching my kids, or hey, you know, you know, we've things have stabilized, oil markets have stabilized, activity has stabilized, and elections coming up. We also work with some, you know, with some political groups, and so, you know, I think it's the case that let's start getting back to business. And so we're starting to see signs anecdotally in some of the campaigns that we're running for clients, and we also see a distinction, you know, campaigns that focus on content that's valuable and informative are doing fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're, if you show someone a case study on how they can solve a problem, like reduce oil field emissions, or you know, reduce per unit lease operating expense, they're all over it, because frankly, that's the name of the game today. You know, and as we go through the business cycle, you know, the energy business cycle especially, you know, different value propositions take on more importance at different points in the cycle. And right now, you know, the number one value proposition is, how can you reduce my per unit lease operating expense?
Absolutely.
That's, I mean, you know, as commodity, as producers of a commodity, we don't get to set our own price. Although, you know, another trend that public companies especially have to deal with are the rise of ESG criteria among institutional investors.
So is that still a thing right now? Because I know we need it, but it is such a controversial subject within the oil and gas sector, because we're allowing outside forces to set metrics on us, and we have already been burned by the funny money, and we're seeing sort of the evolution of the private equity groups, because we understand that the old model, it was great at first, but it almost generated a true Ponzi scheme of oil. And you can't have you have to go back to balanced books. You can't have an exit strategy be your business plan. So the rise of ESG, is it going to burn us, or is it going to save us?
I don't know. You know, it's too early to say, but what we do know is that it's a factor. In fact, the E in ESG, as one of our client CEOs tells me, is probably the most important right now, and I tend to agree.
Well, it is, because we have activists and negative actors and, negative players who are trying to capitalize on global black swan events for a narrative.
You know, when we but there is some science behind it, and I think it's important for the industry to recognize it. And there's a dichotomy in the industry as well that's emerged over the past 6 months, and you can really see the division. There's almost two divisions. There's the U.S. industry, and then there's the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So the rest so the rest of the world caught on to ESG much faster than we did. You know, the concept of having social license to operate and so forth. I mean, that's been very popular for a long time in Canada and in Europe, and
their oil markets are doing great.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of that has to do with their asset quality, right?
And
you know,
leadership.
Yeah, and the fact that they're the government is the sole owner of the resource. So if your royalty, if your lessor tells you that you have to do different things, then you have to do those things. Here in the U.S., it's a little different, but in the U.S. Market, we see a definite dichotomy between the big producers, the larger integrated independents and majors, and some of the smaller independents. And we've seen that as companies like Oxy, Shell. I know they're not U.S., but they do have U.S. operations. Devon, Cimarex here based in Denver. All these companies and more have announced targets to reduce methane intensity. So they have, and they're tying and routine flaring. So they have announced that they're setting targets to reduce these things, these methane emissions and flaring, and they're tying it to executive compensation. So it's not.
I think it's a fair thing to do.
Yeah,
it's a little collateral behind the message.
I agree, and I think it's a step. Now you've got others who do not see it that way, who are resisting the change. And if you're a private company, I think it's a lot easier for you to resist making changes to your compensation policies and your ESG policies. But at the end of the day, if you're owned, 60% plus by institutions, then you really have to. Sorry, but it's kind of free market. You got to listen to your shareholders.
Yeah.
And
I think it also goes back to there is an economic commitment behind a lot of these changes. So people want to invest in what works and not what just looks good. And I think, things like methane emissions, flaring, saltwater disposal, just across the board, we want to get better. And as an industry, we have proven that we get better every decade, every year, every other day. And, when there's questions and data that is sending a message that's not necessarily the truth because there are too many, risk variables associated with the analysis, I understand the hesitancy to commit to the financial side of that. If you're going to have to do it to answer to your shareholders, you want to make sure it works. You want to make sure it's worth your time, your money, and your investment.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it reminds me of some of the. So we work with a lot of small to medium-sized energy tech companies, and some of them might only be 2 people. It's a 2-person startup, or it could be a private equity-backed company with $100 million in sales and many employees, and it's interesting that. How do you get from that 2-person startup to the successful, growing, energy tech company, or any tech company for that matter? And it's. I remember I went to a energy tech networking event last year, and
those are very good events, by the way.
They're great, and because people will tell you the unvarnished truth, and when you get them on a panel. It's funny. You get people on a microphone and they'll talk like a canary, Oh,
I'm aware.
but the point being is that they had one of the technology screeners from one of the large E&P companies with the headquarters here in Denver, and he made a really good point about technology and trying to figure out what works. And his point was, we operate, let's say, 10,000 wells. And if we try technology on let's say 100 wells, we don't know really statistically if we've hit and it works. We don't know if we got like the only 100 wells that it's going to work on, or if it's going to work even better on others. So his attitude and his policy was we want to deploy new technologies very quickly. We want to fail fast. We want to learn quick. And then we want to adopt the best practice. Now that's a big company, right? And they can afford to take risk. And there are companies, and we know who they are, who are the early adopters. And so if you're a small to medium-sized business and you've got a great innovative technology-based solution for oil field problem, we can tell you who those key early adopters are, and those are the ones you want to target first. Especially if your value proposition relates to ESG, or if it relates to something like production optimization or artificial intelligence. I mean, some companies just naturally have a cultural predisposition to adopting technology. So let's say you get a couple of customers and you say, wow, that's great. I'm off to the races. And then nothing. And then you get 2 or 3 customers and you think you got a real business. And then no, all of a sudden, your email marketing campaigns are still showing that they're okay. People are showing up to your webcast and your podcast, but no one's making a decision. No one's buying. You still have to remember that those early adopters represent a very small part of the market. And so, as you in most of the oil and gas business, and this is not unique to oil and gas by any stretch of the imagination, the majority of the market is filled with risk-averse decision makers, right? I mean, nobody, and when you start to look at most of the rest of the market, they don't want to buy anything that might risk their career or might risk their lease operating expense, per unit. So you got to prove to them by being a market focused company, by focusing on what you do well and building a reputation with those early adopters. That's what's going to help you bridge the gap to the mainstream market. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of where I wanted to take it.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I do want to pivot back though, since you are a modeler, you are seeing what's happening in market from adoption to discussion and then non-adoption. And that's actually leads me into a very good thing that we as a whole need to be, as a society need to be addressing. And that is when data is presented to us in a raw and unbiased format, or hell, even in a biased format, how does the public consume that? How do we get better with public consumption? I know you have a model to show us on here, but we need to present data in a way that, although there is emotion behind data, the black and white is what is ultimately the end point of the discussion. So what are your thoughts on that? What sort of are you seeing with adoption of the numbers, really?
There's nothing builds trust better than transparency. And I think if you're transparent with your assumptions, with your model, and you're very open about what the assumptions are behind it and how you're coming up with a particular value proposition, then you're more likely to generate trust with the public and also with the market. If you're a company selling a solution to an oil and gas producer or to another manufacturer, something like that. So,
or even in the medical field, we're seeing it was just completely we generated chaos instead of strategy.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that, let's say modeling chaos, was the Imperial College model that the UK used basically to lock down London and that country. I mean, they were predicting. I think I had some notes here where let's see. Yeah, they were predicting something like 50,000 deaths in the UK and 40,000 COVID deaths by May 1st in Sweden.
Did that happening?
No. Actually, as of a few weeks ago, Sweden had experienced just over 2,800 deaths, and that's not something to be proud of or happy about.
Nothing like that.
But that's a big difference from 40,000. And so, after further scrutiny, even the people who the professor who put the model together, after other peers looked at it, it turned out that that it was wildly inaccurate. And actually he resigned because he got caught with his girlfriend because he wasn't
Oh,
following
that's
it.
right. The one with the girlfriend that walked behind him.
Yeah,
Well,
and
that explains why his model was wrong.
so not only was his model wrong, but he also failed to live up to his own social distancing guidelines. But there you go.
Oops.
So
We've all been on a socially distanced date. Come on, that's why Zoom got so many hits.
that's right.
So what do you have to show us?
So one of the things that we do, again, I mentioned earlier, is that we try to help our clients quantify their value proposition, and so we take we try to take a data-driven approach, a quantitative approach to marketing when we can. Now, this is different because than consumer marketing. So consumer marketing, it's more. I mean, we're not trying to reach an audience of 5 million joggers to sell our running shoes to, right? I mean, that relies on making sure you get the message right, you got the imagery right, you're trying to portray your customer, you're trying to get them to see themselves in your advertising. So there's a lot of it's a different type of marketing as opposed to B2B marketing, where it's very much focused on how are you going to impact my business results. And so one of the things we do, let's see, I'm going to share the screen here, and we'll see if this works.
As soon as it pops up, I will share it. There it is.
All right. So this is, I'm almost embarrassed to show this because it's so simple. Because when you talk about models, you're thinking, oh, I'm expecting some kind of whiz bang, super spreadsheet with 16 or 50 different worksheets, and there's different programming, and we're using multiple formulas and so forth. And that's true. But I will say this from experience is that the 80-20 rule applies to modeling. Typically, when I was building strategic planning models for a big food manufacturer, it was like you could spend 40 hours putting that model together, and it was about as good as it was going to get. You could put in another 80, or trying to get your deferred tax account line item just right by building 6 different spreadsheets behind it to encounter every situation that you might spend 100 hours on that, but at the end of the day, it's a more complex model, but it's not a better model, and it didn't improve the accuracy of it. So sometimes in a dynamic market where there's a lot of variables that you can't incorporate into your model, or at least you can't incorporate accurately, sometimes simple is best. So
simple is always best.
and I respect your comment because you are an engineer and you do a lot of modeling. I know. So this is
make anything look amazing.
That's right. So real. I mean, just boiling it down. What are we trying to model? So what we're really trying to do is say, okay, if you have a value proposition that's going to sell, that's going to resonate, especially at this point in the cycle, it's got to be linked to a key performance indicator, some kind of KPI that's driving the business. In oil and gas, there's a couple that come to mind that are common. One is going to be uptime. Another might be EUR, end ultimate recoveries. But you gotta find a way, and ideally you started with a way to identify how your solution can impact those problems. If it doesn't impact those KPIs, chances are you have a nice to have. And if you have a nice to have, it ain't worth having for many people, and it's going to be a very difficult road to hoe. So what we try to do is work with our clients to figure out how does your solution impact a KPI, especially when it comes to the E&P market. And one of those is, so this is a very easy, simple model that it's based on uptime. And so here we've modeled this out 10 years. We've started with 700 barrels per day for this particular production pad, and it declines at 10% a year. I know as an engineer you're cringing. There's no B factor. There's no N factor. This would not pass muster on a reserves report. We know, but I'm going to get back to that in just a second. So then we're modeling out annual production here on this line, and then we're saying, okay, so if you have 85% uptime, and we're putting in our commodity price assumption, our wellhead price assumption, our LOE and SG&A per barrel of oil assumption. You could flip this to be MCFE if you want, obviously, and then we're modeling out those cash flows to say, okay, if we discount them at 10%, what's our net present value? And in this case, it's $15.5 million. So super simple. But here's the cool thing about this is that if you're energy tech, if you're selling something and they believe and you can prove that your solution impacts uptime, now everything else falls into place. Now you can have a conversation with somebody and you can talk about these assumptions. And now it's no longer about why my technology is so whiz bang cool, which nobody cares about. Now you're talking about how you're actually going to impact the results. And if you're talking to another engineer or production superintendent or somebody like that, they can say, well, that's the wrong production. I'll give you the numbers to use.
Yeah.
Now you've got them engaged. Now you're having a discussion that's based on developing a vision of how your solution is going to help them. So in step 2, we say, all right, where do we go from here? So I made this absurdly good, to just make a point with modeling, right? So proof that, you can make a model look and feel like anything you want it to look like. But if you're engaging with your customer and they're giving you actual data and they believe in your assumptions and they're having an impact on how this model is produced, then they're going to buy into it more. And I think that goes really with any modeling. If you're open with the public, if you educate them and help them understand why you're making policy decisions and when you're going to change your model, that's the key, right? So
that's a big key.
Because models are typically very linear and they fit a point in time. And so if you really get into the strategy of it, and here's where the nerd in me starts to come out, you start to get into probabilistic scenarios and things like that, which is cool, but we don't have time for that. So in this case, let's say the solution increased or uptime by 95%. We take that in, but what we had to do is we had to increase operating costs by 50 cents a barrel. So there is no free lunch. There's a cost, there is a benefit. The key is do the costs and the benefits outweigh each other? And if we look down here, we've increased the PV10 value of this particular production pad by $1.25 million. And so that also begs the question of how much is enough. I think
if you can't prove a value proposition these days above 20%, there's no point. You're just recreating existing technology without any sort of unique factor or unique sauce that makes you more profitable or more usable and consumable than your predecessors.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. That goes along with the must-have. So if you can prove a scenario like this that can prove and that can demonstrate an economic benefit to the customer, you are already more than halfway down the road. In fact, you're not going to have to sell anymore. They're going to want to buy it. They're going to pull you. They're going to pull you through their buying process. You don't have to push anymore. And so that's if you can do this, that's it become a very powerful tool for building trust through your models with the client, so that you can get them basically to say, yeah, I need this. When can you start? But there's always that question on the buying team. There's always going to be somebody who asks, what needs to change? Mm-hmm. What do I got to do? What do I got to do to get that? I understand I have to pay 50 cents per barrel to achieve the benefits, and the benefits are enough. Let's say it's at least 20%. It has to be because there's always a cost to change. That cost could be financial. That cost could be organizational. That cost could be cultural. But there's there's always some pain involved in adopting something new. Now, it could be the pain of adoption could be something very trivial, such as, oh, I'm just going to download an app on my iPhone. No problem. That pain's still pretty low. But it may be, well, no, you're going to have to shut in your wells for a week, while we go out there and install things. Or, there's a possibility that, production might not come back to its pre-installation levels for a while. Or no, now I gotta reassign people to different jobs. The more friction there is in terms of adopting your solution, the more delta, i.e. positive gain, you've got to offer the market. And so that's where, unfortunately, working over the years, we've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different management teams, lots of different technologies, and, where they inevitably, I hate to say fail, but, where they inevitably run into big challenges is that if, for example, this one company we were working with many years ago, their payback was longer than 12 months, and they weren't going to get the major benefit to the solution for another 3 years.
It is what it is. That's not profit. I mean, that's not,
it's not
add value. That's not a proposition for value.
No, it's not. And unfortunately, most of the market said, I could just do a workover on an old well and get more return right now than by adopting this solution where I'm going to have to change everything. And so sometimes just having a cool whiz-bang technology just isn't enough. And I know we all know that. And I know we all feel very passionate about our technology that we've developed. But at the end of the day, you got to look at it. You got to do the numbers. You got to put the models together and be real honest with yourself and with your customers.
Well, James, I know we are wrapping up, but that was actually a very good segue. So now that we've gone through the importance of the models, we've looked at some stats, we are still on that pivot. And to your point, you have to be able to prove value with the pivot. Yeah, put your hat back on.
So
you're out.
So this is the sign. No, I mean, it's kind of funny, but this is a sign I will be looking for. I mean,
baseball when we're back. But for a final question, Lookbacks Leverage and the pivots that companies, I don't care if you're oil and gas or you're a restaurant down the street, what do we need to start looking at from what we've learned thus far in order to move forward? What is that number that's unbiased, honest, and gives us the leverage we need for a successful pivot?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to look at two things. Number one, look at weekly unemployment, first-time unemployment claims. They've been trending down, and when they start to get closer to the pre-COVID levels, once they start to get below 1 million, then I think you're going to start to realize that maybe the worst of the bloodletting in the labor market is starting to come to an end. Then on the plus side, again, we're talking about macroeconomics because right now everything is macroeconomic. Real quick in the oil markets, and I think we're seeing it. We're starting to see the storage additions to oil storage decline. We've seen that decline weekly over the past 4 weeks. And so that's what's given the oil markets a little bit of comfort that, we're not going to see oil cresting over the tops of storage tanks at Cushing and other places. I think we've come to the conclusion that perhaps the worst is behind us. We'll see with that data, but that's a key.
I agree with you. That's a little premature. I think it could come back real fast.
Yeah, and I think that's a real key metric that the oil business really needs to focus on, and especially in North America. And the third is going to be ultimately employment. Are we going to see people going back to work? Because here's the issue, and you and I have kind of talked about this before. Employers don't hire thinking that they might get some demand. They hire when they experience the demand. And so, if you're a restaurant owner or service company, a marketing consulting company, things like that, you don't hire until you have demand for the workers. And so, I think it'd be really interesting to see what data coming out of the Restaurant Association looks like. Are we seeing people coming coming back? Are we seeing customers come back? Are we seeing those, if they're open at 50% capacity, are they filling those seats? So I can tell you anecdotally that my wife and I, been out to dinner twice in the past week. Once the restrictions were offered, we ate a lot. So I put on the COVID-15.
Oh, yeah.
Or quarantine 15, however you want to call it.
Quarantine 15, yeah, that's a good one.
So I'm working to get down to my fighting weight again, but but the point being is that are we seeing people going back to work? We tip generously. Are we seeing people start to reopen their restaurants? Are the people who lost their businesses, are they able to start again, or are they able to find work somewhere else? And we hope that they can. It's a very, very difficult time. I don't think we're anywhere near complete with this, and we got to remember we still got 6 months of 2020 to get through before we get to 2021.
2021's got to be better, but all right. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was an awesome discussion. Again, everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. This was the 710 Oilfield News, which is a segment of the Crude Audacity podcast. If you have any more questions for James, I suggest you check out Prizm Group. You can find them online, LinkedIn. What's the email address again? Or not the email, the website address.
The website address. So we try to put out a blog post that talks about topics like this every couple of weeks, maybe every week. We are at #1, the numeral 1, prizmgroup.com. Check us out. Thank you.
Prizmgroup.com. All right, James, thank you so much. You have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, Catherine.
Bye.